if you need to re-grip your shaft, or if you even wanted to shorten your shaft, you can actually remove the connector from the shaft. And these are screwed on with two little screws. And they are is this a number 1? I forget because we have a few, yeah. These are a number 1 Phillips bit, so it's really gonna help if you can find the smaller size Phillips bit. Instead of a number 2 is more typical. You wanna find the smaller size. You can use a hand screwdriver. I'm gonna use this electric one so that you don't have to sit there watching me turn it by hand. Oh, you don't want it to slip like that. That is gonna strip the screw. So whenever you're doing any screw, one of the most important parts of using a screwdriver is to keep it aligned with the screw. If it's crooked from the screw hole, if it's crooked like this at all, that's gonna cause it to strip out. You really want them to be perfectly parallel. Just a little bit of being off. If you find it's stripping and you're having trouble with that, that's almost always the reason why, is that it's not aligned well. The other reason is if you don't have enough pressure. You need to push into the screw to get it to come out. If you're just lightly pushing, it's just gonna spin. Once you strip that out, you're kind of screwed. So try to avoid that from the start. So now that we've taken the screws out, this connector is just on there with a friction fit. And this might be the tightest fit of all that you might encounter. This one's not too bad, but this is definitely a case where you might want to grab a rag, or if you have a jar gripper or something like that. You can even resort to some large pliers, but you're likely to damage it. Once you twist that off, those screws are simply piercing the carbon fiber. We don't even pre-drill when we do this. We just put the screws straight in. Now I could, if I wanted, do this on both ends and use a hacksaw to cut down the length of my shaft if I wanted to change my shaft length. I could also now cut off my grip and put on new grip. I could do a wrap grip or use an air compressor or hairspray to slide on some bar grip. We have a separate video about that. And then once I'm done, I'm going to want to, you're pretty much, like you can just eyeball it, but the grip goes underneath the end of the adapter. Right? And that covers it up and prevents it from getting caught when you're playing with it. You don't want this to be exposed, you want it to be covered. So if you do modify your grip, you're gonna want to trim the grip to be somewhere around here. You have quite a bit of tolerance, you just want to get it in here, but you see it, once it gets up to about here, there's no longer a gap for it. So it needs to be somewhere in that zone of length. Another thing you want to consider when putting these back on is alignment. I have two choices here. One is to try and get the screws back into the same holes, and that is generally going to mean that the buttons and screws on this connector are aligned with the one on this connector. Another way that I can do that is going to be to just line up the holes with my eye, push it on as much as I can by hand, and then to make sure that it is fully on all the way, and you must do this. Even if you think you got it on all the way, it might have gotten caught on a little piece of the 3D print or something. You want to really pound it on there and make sure that it is definitely on all the way. Otherwise, the screws are not even going to hit the carbon fiber. It's not going to hold it on there. And of course, it will change the length and maybe the balance of your puppet too. Like that. So now that that's back on, if I'm making new holes, it's really helpful to have an electric screwdriver. You could do it by hand, but it's gonna be some seriously hard screwing. To get it into the same holes, not that hard. But either way, you wanna get nice and lined up and push with a good amount of force. If you have the wrong size screwdriver, it's gonna be awkward. It's gonna try and like go all over the place. But with the right size one, it's actually quite rigid. It stays in there nicely. That. The other side here. There we go. And you want to get it in there nice and snug to the point where it's not going to hit the tube. Basically, the screw should be recessed. Like if I do this, it won't touch the tube. You also don't want to screw it in so tight that it's trying to like push through the 3D printed rubber part, because you could potentially over tighten it or even strip it out where it's basically drilled a hole through the carbon fiber. So you don't want to do that. Then you can put your other tube on. If you have a very tight connector, again, you don't want to lube these because you're not going to be breaking these down very often. You want it to be nice and firm. Line the holes up. And here, if it's really tight and you can't just put it on by hand, again, you might want to pound it on the floor. Which might even press your buttons. And voila.